Welcome to Planetary Calendars, Astro Portraits. I'm Ralph Demetrius, one of the astrologers. The portrait this time is Malcolm Gladwell, the author of some remarkable books. The Outlier, for instance. Outliers is one of them, for instance, which kind of is a good one to point out because he, in many ways, himself is an outlier. He is someone who moves very much outside the norm in many ways. His chart is very interesting. The only problematic point is that we don't have a time. So if anyone has a time, please feel free to share. He was born September 3rd, 1963, a Tuesday, at 6:33 p.m. This is our rectification, in Fareham, England. Now, why did we pick 6:33 p.m.? A number of reasons, and this is where really what we're talking about today is rectification. How do you rectify a chart? Once we knew what his sun and moon position were, okay, which was not that hard because his moon is not real close to the edge. His sun is at 10 degrees Virgo. Venus is conjunct his sun at 11 degrees Virgo, so he has a great deal of charm. It's kind of interesting. He also has Pallas Athena in Virgo. Mercury in Libra, and that's significant because as a Virgo, Mercury is his ruling planet. The fact that Mercury is in Venus's sign and Venus is conjunct his sun makes him very likable. Mercury in Libra is famous for having a hard time making up its mind. You know, it's one of these people that really weighs stuff back and forth and back and forth and back, you know, forever practically before they finally make up their mind. He has Mars also in Libra. Interestingly, he has Mars conjunct Vesta, which is about having a mission, and Mars is at the star Spica, which is the brightest star in the largest constellation, Virgo. And many years ago, we were at a lecture, and we were with an expert in fixed stars, and he said, many times people have significant planets that are like copy machines. They're tremendously prolific. They just pour stuff out. And he very much is like that. He's written a whole slew of fantastic books, and he's also a columnist for the New Yorker and writes articles consistently for them. This is a very, very wealthy person, but he keeps working as a journalist, you know, doing interviews. It's something he loves. Mars and Spica. It's very productive. Now, the moon is in Pisces, and when you watch him talk, you can really spot that. And the moon is also apparently fairly close to Chiron, the wounded healers, which is about having scholarship, but it's also about sensitivity to other people's pain and your own pain. And his own background is very complex. You know, if you look at his history, it's very unusual in many ways. If we put Aquarius at the rising, it puts Saturn in Aquarius at the rising. Now, Saturn in Aquarius is the traditional rulership position. And we think it's, you know, we consider it a rulership position, which means that it's an extrovert position. It's an extrovert position in the dynamic sign of Aquarius. But of all the different dynamic signs, you know, of all what's called the masculine signs, Aquarius is the most, I think, in many ways androgynous, in that it's focused on the larger group. So it's focused on the male and the female. It also tends to make Aquarius rising people who are unusual looking. And he is unusual looking. It's got a very unusual look. Saturn at the rising tends to make people who have very prominent bones. And he's a very active runner. And he's very trim. He's very, bony. He's literally bony. You really see this. Also, his face is unusual in certain ways. Aquarius many times does that with people, makes them unusual looking. Part of the reason is that there's fewer people born in Aquarius in the northern hemisphere than any other sign. So in terms of what we consider normal, Aquarius is the least common. There's a lot of movie actors, in fact, who are born with Aquarian suns because they are distinctive looking. They look different as compared to the Virgo actors who look like every person because there's more Virgos, or Virgos are one of the most prominent signs. So we have Aquarius rising that puts Sagittarius at the midheaven. This person is very, very widely traveled. Very, very widely traveled. But it's Sagittarius. Who rules Sagittarius? Jupiter. Where does he have Jupiter? The sign of the individual in the third house, the house of interviews. And a lot of his work, a great deal of his work, is done through personal interviews. And I think if you read his work, that's the most interesting part of his work, is his personal interviews with interesting people. And I've just been watching his master class, which is one of the reasons I thought to do his portrait. That his interview style is really very unique. It's very, he's right there with you. It's very much third house. Third house is about saying, hey, see, I'm like you. It's about siblings. It's about friends in your neighborhood. It's about, the Gemini sign. It's about reflecting them back to yourself. It's about engagement skills, your ability to engage with other people. That's a real Gemini skill, a third house skill. Jupiter there has this tremendous gift for recognizing interesting individuals. And he says one of the things you have to do is help people understand why they are interesting when you're interviewing them. For them, it's a normal thing. No, why are they interesting? Why do you find them so interesting? Why are my readers going to find you interesting? Jupiter in the third house in Aries. Okay, it trines the midheaven. It trines that Sagittarius midheaven in the 11th house. The 11th house relates a lot to publications. Remember, he's not only an author of books, he's a journalist. He's publications. He's basically a freelance writer. They're private contractors. The Sun, Venus, right? Uranus. He has Uranus at 5 degrees. Once again, Uranus conjunct the Sun tends to be very electrifying. It tends to be really interesting. Tends to see unusual approaches. It's a very electrifying position when you have the Sun that close to Uranus. And then Venus there, he's unusual looking and yet very charming. It's kind of an interesting combination, unusual and yet charming. Is in the 8th house. There's a lot about his life that is hidden. It's really, he's very good about keeping his own personal secrets. But the 8th house is about digging into mysteries, about going into the unusual, going into the mysterious and digging things out. And that's what his life has been about. His life has been about research and getting to people and getting into, asking them questions. It's funny, he said he many times decides what he's not going to publish because he's worried about people sharing stuff they shouldn't share. It's Virgo there. Virgo is always concerned about other people. Virgo is a healing sign. It's, it reaches out and does stuff that could be difficult. It's doing it for the benefit of the other person. Virgo is one of those. Virgo has a very high sensitivity to other people, and yet in a fairly dispassionate way. And that's his drilling into the hidden spaces. Saturn and Aquarius rising, looking at the big world. What's unusual in the big world? Drilling in to the hidden spaces. And then in the 9th house, he's got Mercury in Libra, Juno in Libra, Ceres in Libra, Mars and Vesta. Big collection of planets in the 9th house. He's lived in a lot of different places. I think now he lives in New York City. But he's lived in a lot of different places. He has a lot of close friends. He has a lot of close contacts. People in distant places who he relates to. In his discussion, his masterclass, he's talking about, I've talked with so-and-so, and we send texts back and forth and have this long discussion. His connections, his ability to work with people from long distances and continue these relationships for long periods of time. That's all that stuff in the 9th house. But it's also, the 9th house, it's research. It's about higher education. What's funny is that in the 10th house, he has Neptune in Scorpio. And the Scorpio, Scorpio is ruled by Mars in the 9th house. His career has always really been about learning. His quest is to learn. To dig into things and to learn. So in some ways for him, his career goals have been kind of nebulous. He knows he wants to dive into life. And yet, that's not his, being successful was not, at the top of this was not his thing. Saturn rising, Saturn rising, they'll be ambitious. Saturn rising, that's an ambitious position. But in terms of where he got to, he really gets there and kind of steps behind it. Like, in other words, he always says that in his interviews is that it's incredibly important to him that he not be the most interesting person in the interview. That his subject is what's interesting. In other words, he thinks that the goal of his, career has been about highlighting all these people he's worked with, all these different interesting places. And mostly people, Jupiter in the 3rd house in Aries, it's about people. It's not about construction sites. It's not about technology. It's about people. But his actual goal, what he accomplishes, is kind of nebulous. It has a big effect, Neptune in Scorpio. But it's a little nebulous that way. It's not as crystallized as you might think. A lot of what really crystallizes for him is 9th house and 11th house. 9th house, research. 11th house, it's been published. So I think this Aquarius rising really works. I really do. I think that would make him born about 6:33 p.m. is what we used here in England. It's fairly far north in Virgo. And, Sun conjunct Uranus always does interesting things with a person. So that's Malcolm Gladwell's chart. I hope you found that little rectification exercise interesting. Come see us every Tuesdays for our astro portraits. And of course, on Fridays, we do our forecast for the coming week, and find those at Planetary Calendar Astrology with Ralph and Lonnie on YouTube. And you can also find them at planetarycalendar.com, where you can also find, of course, your planetary calendars and our various different books. Until next time, be well.